Om pramadena nasandeha kim karishyami vrittiman. Utpadyante vilyante budbuddhascha yatajale. Om shanti, shanti, shanti. Ignorance is not real. Therefore, how can it cause you any real doubt? Therefore, what does the yogi do with the projections of his mind? He allows them to rise spontaneously and dissolves them back like bubbles into water at the end of a day. Om peace, peace, peace. There shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us, may that Brahman sustain us, and may that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So we are gathered here on this Sunday after a break for a retreat on the US mainland. We're back in Hawaii. It's a holy day called Kamehameha, King Kamehameha Day. He united all the islands at one time, all these Hawaiian islands. So he's looked upon as a great integrator. It reminds us of Sri Ramakrishna at the spiritual level and of Swami Vivekananda at the philosophical level. How we bring together these factions which otherwise in the ordinary mind float out there and bring us risk and karma and states of mind which are not noble, as I just chanted, especially to the yogi and yogini, to the Avadhut in this case, whom we're studying. I believe this is the fourth class because we had 3 before I left and then the break. So I looked back on the third one a few days ago and saw where we ended. It was with this chart on the flame, fuel, and its heat. And we were trying to take apart the fire of yoga because the Avadhut had just sang to us, Nishkarma karma dahano, Jvalano bhavami, Nirdukkha dukkha dhavano, Nishpapa papa dahano. So Nirbodha bodha dahano. He goes through all of these near preface words, which mean opposite or extinction or dissolution. And so he beautifully told us how he's the fire of living intelligence that destroys the sins of the sinless one, destroys the karmas of the karmaless one, and destroys the suffering of the sufferingless one. And is even beyond the pairs of opposites, which he sings next to us, Nirdharma dharma dahano, which means so he's beyond the dharma and the lack of dharma, or what we would call adharma. So as we look at these verses, today we'll be looking at verse 10 and 11, because we were taking those, I am the fire which burns the intelligence, burns the sins and burns everything, and dissolves everything to leave him in this state of non-dual awareness. So Those were verses 7, 8, and 9 of this Avadhut stotram, which I'm calling Samarasa or Gyanamritam stotram. It's also a Chalisa, 40 verses that are collected there in the Avadhuta Gita at the beginning of chapter 3. So we've taken them out, extracted them, put them into a beautiful song, which is now on CD. If people still use CDs if they want to hear it or have a copy of their own, with the English translation. And so we're taking these beautiful but rather simple Sanskrit terms. That is, the Sanskrit itself is not all that difficult to understand, but the non-dual message behind the Sanskrit is difficult. It's very subtle. Its difficulty is that it's so subtle that people usually don't think that way to try and comprehend being beyond dualities, like say beyond bad, good, but also beyond good, better. And then what Vivekananda said, beyond good, better, and getting to best. So the Avadhut has reached a state of consciousness which is the best of all levels, if you can call it a level, of dwelling in the Atman and abiding in the Atman. So we're going to have a seminar or a retreat on that soon. 108 verses on I am Atman, all abiding. So these are very special souls that have gone the full distance in spiritual practice. Again, back to Dharma and Adharma, there are people who can and do live Dharmic lives, but it's very possible that they don't live spiritual lives. A spiritual life is something that is attended by spiritual experiences. Samadhis, they're called, and bhavas. And so it's very rare you come upon a soul like that. And it was fortunate for all of us that Sri Ramakrishna was born in this age, there in the 1800s in India, in Bengal, and showed us again, face to face with people, what samadhi really was. Not that you can again understand it by looking at its external manifestations. There are 6 signs of samadhi that if you knew from the scriptures, then you would say, looks like he's in samadhi. But he kind of left no doubt to his spiritual states. And when he was in them, it was easy to see that he was in a kind of ecstasy. This is the end of every verse here. Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham. So I am this bliss, this peace, this light, this love of the bliss of non-dual wisdom. So I'm the non-dual wisdom that burns the sins of the sinless one. That means sins could accrue to anyone, or transgressions could come to anyone. Imperfections are in everyone. But when they suggest themselves to the pure mind of a being like the Avadhut or like Sri Ramakrishna, they get burnt up right away as if they were never there. Sort of like introducing cotton to fire, poof. Others' karmas are like wood chunks. Maybe have to burn a long time before you find the ashes for those. But these great souls are in that very subtlemost, anaranian, it's called, state of samadhi, anaranian samadhi. I just coined a new samadhi for all of us, the subtlemost of all samadhis. And so it's very difficult to know what they're experiencing within. And it's also quite difficult to understand what state they're in by seeing them, their external forms. So this is where the Avadhut starts us off this time by saying, Nispapa papa dahano. This papa means the opposite of punyam. Punyam is merit, papa is demerit, or punya would be good karma coming, and papa would be negative karma or demerits or sins, if you want to use that word. I remember my teacher, Swami Shishanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him, used to tell us that there was no such word for sin in Sanskrit, that when you came across a word that you find like in the Gita with Krishna, kilbisa, or some Sanskrit word like that, it really just means a kind of transgression. We know from the tantric darshana of India that sins are called malas. They're imperfections that you take on when you come into the body, and as you burn them away, they leave space for consciousness. So they're coverings like anything else. And by the way, we'll be talking about that in our seminar weekend after next. Next weekend, we'll be here with you as usual. The weekend after that, I believe, is our seminar called Insights and Impediments on the Spiritual Path, where we'll be talking about impediments as a type of inhibitor. Impediments as a kind of sign of progress. Like if you have things come up that are in your way and that challenges you, then that builds your muscles. Like the difference between just walking a smooth path and all of a sudden having to jump a log. You have to build up certain muscles and clamor and exert to get over the log, whereas you could have just walked a smooth path. That's good that you came upon that log in the path. So we're going to be talking about impediments like that. And in the opposite way, we're going to be talking about insights as risky things sometimes, that you might give yourself too much credit, like some people, like, oh, I'm enlightened now because I had this great insight, or I had this vision, I'm now a realized soul. And then, within days, weeks or so, then they go back to their old normal self again. So that's why the best sign of spiritual progress is your character, how you build your character. That was one of the great teachings of Sri Sharada Devi and Sri Ramakrishna when they came. As they say, blisses and visions and such things like that are the byproducts of spiritual life. The real signs of spiritual growth is you're building your character. So character it'd be nice to have a chart on that, and maybe let's just build a chart on character and say what's in character, and here's the people that we know and agree upon who have strong character, and these are some of the attributes in it, like say compassion for suffering and various things like that, which you don't see in most other people. They're barely able to take care of themselves, rather than maybe try and turn and help some others along the path. So this dissolution of dualities has been mentioned, and those dualities that Krishna mentions in the Gita called Dvandva Mohena are things like good and bad and pleasure and pain. They're very common variety, garden variety dualities, but these dualities that the Avadhut is singing about here, that he's transcended and left behind. Means that his mind has gone beyond things like bondage and liberation, and beyond things like dharma and adharma, or dharma and even swadharma. He's reached this state of pure, perfect, non-dual awareness, wherein he also says here, was it there, near dukkha dukkha dahano. He also says near deho deha dahano. Deha means body. So I'm the fire of intelligence that burns the bodies of the bodiless one. Let's add that one in to contemplate too. So you know that if he's saying that, his body has been burnt in the ashes of Jnanamritam, his highest wisdom. And you may still see it, like a flesh and blood and bones body there. But like we saw in Sri Ramakrishna, it was almost, and in Swami Vivekananda, they were just so much not associated or not identified, certainly, with their bodies. At one point, Sri Sharada Devi, seeing them both like this and being that way quite often herself, said that, what's all this fuss about the body, which is just a few pounds of ashes in the end? And about the ego, she said, forget your personality. Remember your true self. So people are living in these egos and in these bodies all the time as if they were real and that's their true nature. And then saying all this is Brahman, it doesn't work. Read my God blogs last week. Decaying bodies, immature egos, impure senses are not Brahman. And so you mar my doctrines, wronging, balking. Vivekananda said, I never taught such queer thought as that. I don't teach that. That all is God, but I can say that God is true, all else is nothing. So he's immediately got a sort of discrimination where he's cutting away everything that changes, and no compromises in that. and no mercy for things that are insentient. And he's just proclaiming, now that it's away, it's burnt away, it can be Brahman for you. But before you were attached to it as if it were real or in any way actual, it could not be Brahman for you. You would be a hypocrite to be saying those words like aham brahmasmi or tat tvamasi, that thou art, I am Brahman. That would be contradictory to the truth of Advaita Vedanta. So in the Avadhut, we have this true representative of Advaita Vedantist, of an Advaita Vedantist. And so those were the last verses we sang 3 weekends ago, possibly, before we left on this retreat, which was, by the way, on the Kundalini Yoga system, in which 8 or 10 of us gathered and went fine-tooth comb through the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad and did everything from the special Vedic breathing exercises to the deeper understanding of the Melana mantra and the Kechari mantra. This is the mantra that's given to you by the Guru, as opposed to mantras that are given to you by, say, somebody on the beach, or somebody who picked up hitchhiking. I can give you a mantra. Or I've read this in the book, you can use it too. But the Upanishad comes forth and says the Kechari mantra is something very precious that's given to the qualified disciple after years of practice and preparation by a guru that's used this mantra for a very long time and has realized that the meaning of the words in it, how they connect into the deities and beyond the deities. And I'm sure that if he had a thought of it, the Avadhut would have said, I'm the fire of non-dual wisdom that burns the deities of the deityless Atman. See, as all the gods and goddesses also got dissolved back into little old me. Not the little self, ahamkara, but the great self, Atman. Not the individual self, the ego, but the indivisible self, Brahman. So in that way, I'm trying to connect you back to what we looked at in the last class of this series. We're trying to go through all 40 verses of this Chalisa. I'm calling it a Chalisa because 40 verses means Chalisa. And so we're kind of been taking 2 or 3 of these verses every class. So let's sing you another 2 or 3 of these and do a little commentary on them. Nispapa papa dahano hihuta shanoham nirdharma dharma dahano hihuto shanoham nirbanda banda dahano hihuto shanoham gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham nirbhava bhavarahito napavami vatsa niryoga yoga rahito nabhavami vatsa nischita chitta rahito nabhavami vatsa gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham nirmoham moha padaviti name vikalpa nishoka shoka padavita name vikalpa nirloba loba pataviti name vikalpa gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham gyanamritam samarasam Gaganopamoham. And I'm sure some are thinking, just go on and sing the other 30 verses. We'll just listen to those flow by. Even if we don't know what they mean, it doesn't matter. It's so beautiful. And it's always for certain talking about that highest truth, the Jnanamritam, the knowledge of non-dual nectar, our new journal, Satyamrita, Advaita Satyamrita has come on now, our 38th issue. And so we have that beautiful nectar of non-dual truth in different religions spoken of there. But you could probably go back to this stotram and probably find a verse in somewhere in the Avadhut that says, I'm the fire of living intelligence that burns the religion of that one who's beyond religion. We know at the end of our time with Lex Hickson, our founder, when he passed from the body, the last series of courses he was giving, classes like this, he was giving were called The Open Space Beyond Religion. So he had also reached that state of higher understanding, let's call it, at least to give that much credence, where he had gone through and looked at all the religions and practiced several of them. He used to say, I hold joint citizenship in several religious traditions of the world. So he made that statement several times within the range of our hearing. And he was very much deep into all the practices, whether it be zikr of the Sufis, mantra practice and recitation of Vedantas, and the prayers of the Muslims and so forth. He had gone deeply into many of these, meditation of the Zen Buddhists, and was at that place where he was declaring, I am the fire of living intelligence, non-dual wisdom of living intelligence that burns the religion that's the religion of that one who has graduated beyond all religions. And so I know there have been some beings I've heard, lyrics of songs even and things like that, would say, well, let's have no religion anymore. Like some people out of the 60s writing pop songs and so forth. And I remember Lex hearing somebody sing a song, a kind of famous pop musician, no religion too, let's not have any religion. And Lex said, oh, that's just so immature. We want more religion. And besides, you have to understand and study the religion before you can go beyond it. You can't just pan it, because that's God's word. And those scriptures are very important, not only to thousands and millions and now billions of people who are on the brink of falling into the sleep of darkness and Maya, death and ignorance, samsara, Maya, and all of these watchwords, but to the seers themselves who live in this non-dual wisdom and who, what's that word, who savor it. Like you would savor a really fine fruit, you see, because we're vegetarian. You see, most of us are vegetarians. So basically something with a very refined taste that your whole attention falls upon it when it comes to mind. And that's the point with the Avadhut. He's got this on his mind all the time. So just to give you an idea of what this means, these slokas. We're starting at sloka 11 we sang there. He said, I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that eradicates the sins of the sinless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that renders extinct the attributes of the attributeless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that strikes off the bonds of the unbound Atman. And then the refrain, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. You can't find anything that can describe his state, so he has to refer back to these two of these great elements, space and ether, or air and space. He goes on to say, I am never harried by delusion or its lack. Grief and absence of grief do not occur to me. So shoka, nishoka shoka was the term in Sanskrit. Shoka means grief, ashoka means non-grief. Like our Ramakrishna Order Swami in California, last generation, Swami Ashokananda, so he'd reached the bliss of having no grief anymore. That was all gone, like the Avadhut. And it is the same with the presence of greed and its disappearance. That is, ideas of lust, greed, anger can come to the mind, and they'll probably stick in an average person and cause problem there. But if thought just comes across the gaze, the inner gaze of a soul like this, it's eradicated by this fire of non-dual wisdom as it stands in the moment, instantaneously. And so he can claim this from his own experience. And he goes on with the third verse I sang then, which was our 3 verses for this week's class. The clinging creeper of birth and death has fallen off my true body. And I have found that the happiness and miseries that belong to life are not within my true self. Instead, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. So he always ends with that to let you know, give you some sort of measure, some sort of contrast to that. Jnanamritam, samarasam. Samarasam is this highest enjoyment. Rasa is just enjoyment. Like, say, we get that out of a good Indian food meal. Oh, we're getting rasam. You know, they say, sit down at a really good Indian chef, and cooks you this fantastic meal that actually gets your mind high when you eat it, not just pleasures of senses. So that rasam, if you take it into the spiritual realm, cultivated and subjected to this fires that he's talking about, what we looked at last time. What is in the flame? What is in the fuel? What is the heat of the fire of yoga as compared to just the fire of the god Agni, for instance, which is you offer to. But what to speak of the fire, the purificatory fire that people have to go through, or the fires of hell that people are subjected to inside of their own self, or just regular fire that you're sitting around, the campfire. See, so you've got different levels of fire. We looked at that chart last weekend at the retreat. Was it last weekend already that we were there, or 2 weekends ago? And so these are all teachings coming from him, if you want to call them teachings. They're more declarations of his spiritual experience, having a hard time. Obviously, he's kind of having a hard time putting them in Sanskrit. So he just uses a very simple brand of Sanskrit, nishoka, shoka, and so forth, and dukkha, dukkha. Most people know shoka is grief and dukkha is suffering, and deha is body, nideha, deha. So it's not hard to figure this out, but then he shoves it on to the rest of us, commentators, you see, gurus, to try and figure it out. So I sat down with this and said, how do I find teachings in English that can explain his state? You might as well just go meditate on him or with him and try and get an injection of that and just go straight to the source. So when I think about it, the thing that was closest to fire, and which I didn't get to some 4 weekends ago, after we took this beautiful teaching on fire, was this burning pillar meditation I wanted to share with you. We didn't get to, and we're going to connect up now with that. But before we leave this is actually my own, you might say, samyama of a yogic being myself, as I'm a Vedantist and I'm a tantric worshiper. I'm a Samkhya philosopher, but where I really camp, is in as a yogi, as a yogic practitioner. And this helps me to understand the fire that burns away impurities and why I spent over 50 years of this life so far burning in that fire, trying to understand that fire and using it for purification and for trying to understand Jnanamritam, the highest non-dual wisdom that my teacher exuded. He used to say, if you want to get warm, come close to the fire. So, because he was not easy to get close to without getting a scolding. So he had some fire of several kinds ready for you when you came forward to test your mettle. Fire does test mettle. But my samyama and with this was that I just said, what is fire? First, it's the flames you see. And then you get close to it and you feel the heat coming off it. And then you look for its origin and you find the fuel. So here, the kind of fuel that the Avadhut's burning are dualities. That's the fuel for his fire. So they're in the mind. And so if he has a mind, I just chanted that, Om Pramadina Nasandeyaha Kim Karishami Vrittiman. If he has a mind, what does a yogi do with his mind? Then he lets these projections rise out of it and witnesses other are in it as if the projections were real, but he's watching them from a distance rise, watches them, observes them, sees them fall again and goes, oh my gosh, they're not really real. They keep doing this, you see. Isn't that kind of like fire? Fire that's consumed all its fuel. It rises when it's got fuel. When the fuel's burned out, it disappears. Where does it go to? Back into the idea of fire, back into the idea of fuel. Put some more fuel on, it burns again. So this is just like your thoughts rising constantly. A very good Buddhist teaching in the systems of Buddhism, Paticca Samutpata and so forth. So this rising and falling of the flames, he's watching the flames of the mind, but he's got a fire that's greater than the projections of the mind that he has subjected himself to. And he used them to get out of the mind so that he could observe it at a distance and become Sakshi Bhutam. He could witness everything that the mind is constantly throwing up as projections, as phenomena, as activities, as thoughts, as objects. And he knows that these are all made out of thought power, but he's extracted himself from them so that he could see this, he could witness this. And so that's why he's burning sets of very subtle dualities as his fuel. Otherwise, people have to subject themselves to the fire of purification and burn things like, oh, I'm attached to virtue, so I've got a real problem with vice coming at me. Or I'm attached to pride, so I've got a real problem of shame creeping in, you see. And so the dualities are constantly in flux like that, and they're subject to them. You can't hang out in one for very long before the other makes its odious appearance. And yoga is all about balance between the two. So much so that when you balance yourself so much, the tightrope you're balancing yourself on disappears and you're walking in air. And that's what the Avadhut does mentally. He walks in air. He's a walker of the skies. See? Beautiful teaching on that in Lord Vashishta, in Vashishta's Yoga, the walker of the skies. Queen Chudala attained that high state. So with this as a segue from several weekends ago, let's look at this burning pillar meditation, because we want to understand this. I am the fire of living intelligence. That burns the sins of the sinless Atman. He also says, "O precious one," he's talking to his student or to you if you're listening, "I am neither distinct from reality nor brought into union with it." Near yoga, right? He sings. So it's a beautiful thing he does with that word, yoga or union. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom. I am not invested with a mind, he says, but I'm also not devoid of a mind. And he says, don't you see, thought belongs to me, but I can also be free of it. So like other people who have their thoughts always controlling them, they're slaves to their thoughts. And I heard just, I think yesterday or something, that people can't stop thinking, somebody told me. See, so they always are thinking about something. Intellectuals are like that, and so forth. So if you have a mind which is under your control, then you've got an on-off switch in there, which you can stop the thought process. Very handy, like say when you want to meditate on that which is beyond thought and action, and get into a higher state of vritti-less yoga. Vrittis are vibrations of thought. So you want to get nivritti, you want to get beyond the vrittis. So that's very good to have that power. And then he sings finally, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless is the sky, infinite like space. So again, trying to find out some way in which I can describe the Avadhut state. I'm running out of charts to do that. I look at most of the charts, a lot of them, of the, I think 380 charts now, a lot of them have to do with Dharma teachings that are not so high as this fella's, this yogi's state of mind. So how do we explain that through charts? But there's some, like we can take apart fire, and we can take it apart as far as how it's worked for these souls. So it says here, when you do this burning pillar meditation, it's a meditation of Lord Virochana, who had commented on it. I remember getting it explained to me by Janggang Khantrul Rinpoche on Maui, here across the channel of our big island, and talking about it. He's talking about it with several people. This kind of Shinei meditation that goes on in that particular lineage of Buddhism. So you can see here, as the points are initiated one by one, lower to higher, the body perspires, the life force heats up, and the mind's lower thoughts expire. Soon one's entire being is purified. He rests in Shinei, calm abiding. Then he becomes a burning pillar of light that benefits all sentient beings who reside in the many upper and lower spheres of existence. Janggang Khantrul Rinpoche. And you see here, as the points are initiated, what are those? First, get your legs held in that crossed position, that tripod that opens up the base of the spine. We talked a lot about that in the Kundalini Yoga retreat a couple weekends ago, how you have to cause an opening in the base of the spine and get a drop of Saraswati Chala, the Divine Mother Kundalini, into that central channel. And as soon as she's in there, she starts making a rush for the heart. It's very beautifully described in the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad. So she says it says you have to shake her first. So this is a big shaking, this burning fire meditation, burning pillar meditation. So you're going to have to do some concentrated, some breathing of 2 feet long. You see, and bring it up from the lowest center to the third center is 1 foot, and the third center to the third eye is another foot. So you have to breathe in that much and try and open up this base of the spine and get a drop of Kundalini Shakti into that central channel. The implication is that most people don't have it in the central channel. The central channel is nothing to them but a piece of bone. That's physically speaking, but even spiritually speaking, close down. We were talking yesterday at satsang about the antarvestini, this special nadi that isn't mentioned very often, like the Sushumnam and the Pingala and the Ida are mentioned, but the antarvestinika is called. That's mentioned, and that's where Kundalini keeps all her force. That's her refuge. It's a special nadi within, Sri Ramakrishna says. And so the yogis are wanting to get a birth there, as it were. See, I think I'll take my next birth right there in the Antarvestini, right at Mother's feet. And so, but back to the practitioner, they're trying to awaken just get a little bit of the Shakti power into their central channel. Now, the central channel is not the spine, bones, and so forth. The lotuses aren't there in the spine with the bones and all that, but it's in the mind that this is. All these centers, all worlds, all kings of heaven are within you. That means within your mind. So the body is something that you're purifying with fire so that you're not attached to it anymore. Because if you think that you can get enlightenment by asana or pranayama, then you're wrong. And that's barely gonna help you get free of the body, and it has a risk of making you more attached to the body. I was just reading the teachings of Sri Sharda Devi today, and she was saying that very same thing. She says it brings risk of getting attached to the occult powers, and desiring longevity, and also becoming attached to the body. So she says, don't do those kinds of exercises. But what breathing you do, restrict it to that little bit that the Guru guides you for, enough to get this inner channel in your mind open. You're opening your mind's channels. Those are where the subtle nadis are. The nadis here connecting to a bony spine are very gross, nerves, blood vessels, and so forth. She doesn't flow through those except as blood and prana, you see, physical prana. But you want to get the psychic prana, and you want to get the lifeblood flowing through these channels of your mind. This doesn't mean your brain either. It means actually your mind. That's where heaven is. That's where everything is, back in the mind. And so that's to say here that basically these points are initiated. You get your legs in that crossed position. Hands are placed together, palms up, right on top of the left, held 4 fingers above the navel. See, so that's the position you see Swami Vivekananda in when you see his famous meditation pose. I'm looking at it right now, beyond the camera, back into the altar there. I can see him sitting in that position. Beautiful, completely mastered. The back is held straight, shoulders slightly back and elevated like the wings of a vulture. The chin is tucked in slightly. The eyes are kept half open, focusing beyond the tip of the nose down into the heart chakra. The tip of the tongue rests slightly on the upper palate, lightly on the upper palate. The head is tilted slightly forward, and all movement is then arrested. Let's see, I arrest you, you can't move. And so you clamp everything down into that position. Sri Ramakrishna said the Divine Mother Kali did that to him. She put him in this position and just kept him there. And he almost heard locks at every center as these centers were arrested. And then when she unlocked him, he could move again. We could only imagine that some 40 or 50 days of sitting under the Bo tree with Lord Buddha, because this is a famous Buddhist meditation, as well as the meditation of Lord Vairochana. Of course, hard to separate Buddha from Vedanta, Buddhism from Vedanta, but we can only imagine that sitting there was under that locked condition. And the breath is arrested too. So the prana of evacuation enters the central channel. It destroys jealousy. The prana of water enters the central channel, reducing anger. The prana of earth enters the central channel, dispersing ignorance. The prana of fire enters the central channel, attenuating desire. The prana of air enters the central channel, ending pride. The prana of ether enters the central channel, removing distraction. All prana flow has ceased at the head. That is, when the head is tilted forward, all movement arrested, and one abides in the stillness of Shanei. These are the basic points in few words that the teaching of the burning pillar reaches this Shanei position, you see. Down here you can see the point of the Shanei practice is to attain undistracted awareness. Therein, the mind ceases to be attracted to outer phenomena. It ceases to think about the past, present, and future, and the future moment. It does not worry about good meditation or bad meditation, For the thought, I am meditating, has vanished for good. So we could add a verse in here. Nir jhana dhyana. See, I'm beyond, I'm the fire of intelligence that burns the meditation of the one who's beyond meditation. See how it connects very well. You also see how it connects very well with the central channel and how you can open that up. So this Kundalini Shakti, what Sri Ramakrishna called Mother Kali, and what's called Mahamaya and Mahashakti and so forth, is there permeating every system in India. And therefore, those beings who would court the infinite and seek the truth, take refuge in her and begin to do these kinds of practices to reach a kind of position like Shinei, which is very much like what the Avadhut is telling us here. It's like he's in that position. Isn't it so obvious that the fire of living wisdom has destroyed all the dualities at a very high level? And so you might as well, someone would look at him who's a Buddhist and say, oh, he's like abiding in Shinei. He's attained it. And so if it were up to him, he doesn't know what to call it. He just says, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. He's gone beyond the beyond, which is actually a statement of the Lord Buddha. So what can I say about fire as we leave behind those three precious slokas? I am the fire of living intelligence that consumes the activities of the activeless, actionless Atman. It consumes the sorrows of the sorrowless Atman. It dissolves the bodies of the bodiless Atman. It eradicates the sins of the sinless Atman. It renders extinct the attributes of the attributeless Brahman. All of those things he says in 2 to 3 verses. And that leaves us with these next verses to ponder. And of course, you might say that after declaring that, it's almost beside the point to talk about delusion and its lack, greed and its disappearance. But he puts those in anyway, and because he wants to tell you that the creeper of birth and death has fallen off my true body. So he's pointing to what Shankara and other Advaitas, more of the traditional fashion, have always been talking about, mature, the death. I don't have a death because I was never born. Namrichur, Nashanka, Name, Jati, Beda, those kinds of slokas in the more pure Advaita Vedanta strain. So now he's going in that direction, which puts him a little bit towards the philosophical. And as he did all this, he wants us to know that when he looked at the mind, he found that all the sufferings and all the miseries were in the mind. And then that's why he just told us that, but I have a mind, but I'm beyond the mind. And I have thought, but I can also turn thought off and on. So he can get into his mind and out of the mind, and into the body and out of the body by the power of his realization. And being a knower of the Atman, we would say in Vedanta, facilitates that in his meditations. So another way to describe this, since he is pointing at philosophy, is this chart on neti neti and iti iti that we sometimes show. In this chart, we know that neti neti is not this, not this. It's a very famous part of the Advaita Vedanta sadhana, we like to call it, because we don't like to strip practice away from non-duality. You attain one by the other. Also, when you have attained the other, that is non-duality, that you see that these great souls go on practicing for probably two reasons. One, to be an example to others that they need to practice to attain that state of non-duality or Shine or living intelligence. And number two is that, as the Avadhut is kind of referring to here, that there are impurities in the mind that can stick to you. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that about his own self when he said, there's, man wanted to go out, so he put on his whites, going to the temple, he put on his white clothes. Before he leaves the house, he realizes that he left the furnace burning in the basement. He's got his whites on, so he goes down into the stairs and very carefully creeps around, putting out the fire, no smoke, no ashes, being very careful to keep himself clean. Finds himself in the temple a couple hours later and looks down, sits down like this and looks down his pant legs and all this soot on them. So there's no way he could keep that from happening, no matter how careful he was. So this is what we're referring to here when the Avadhut mentions greed and absence of greed, and delusion and absence of delusion, is that if you have a mind, these things are rising. That's why I chanted at the beginning of this class, what does a yogi do with his projections? They rise, he watches them, they fall. He knows that they're constantly in motion and flux, so they cannot be Brahman, which is motionless and fluxless. And then as he watches them rise and falls, if some of them don't fall one day, he seizes so and dunks them back in himself. This is a very wonderful practice and something for us to take notice of. Beings maybe have reached a high state of awareness for, Holy Mother said, for days, but then they come back to their old self and they find these really irritating things that came back with them. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that about raising the Kundalini, the inferior way, dancing and singing. And then when it comes up like that, people get all elated. And then it's maybe up to the heart, you see. It's opened some devotion. But they haven't built a platform there of devotional practices and a platform here of philosophical teachings and a platform here of inner vision and spiritual experience. So she's not going to stay there. She'll fall back like a thermometer gets hot, put it near ice and it falls again. The spine is like that phenomenal, that thermometer, and it rises in the mental spine we're talking about, and then it falls back down. So he said they'll wake up in the next morning after dancing and singing that night, and they'll go out and commit a bunch of illicit acts, and fall under the power of lust, greed, anger, avarice, jealousy, pride, shame, fear, grief. Let's write a new set of verses for all of those for the Avadhut. And because he just mentions grief and delusion here. Those are some of the 6 passions and 8 fetters. So he's aware of those in the mind. And that's a very good teaching right there for us. They're in the mind. It's like Krishna saying, all these things, they don't happen in your Atman, Arjuna. This war, is not happening in your Atman. I'm the fire of living intelligence that burns the war and violence of that one who has no war and no violence, you see. So they're holding this state of perfection all the time as their ideal. So he tells Arjuna that basically, then you hold that state like this, and don't fall out of it like you have just now. At the same time, it's very seemingly compassionate of you not to want to go and kill people. The other time, you just let yourself out of your projection. They're going to come kill you. You're not only going to die as a coward, being a warrior, but you're also going to give up the most precious thing that gave you protection at the same time. So it's not just dying from the body, it's dying from your commitment to spiritual life. That's a real death, as close to real death as you can get. So this is why this philosophy holds true and moves through. So all of these things then, he's talking about greed and delusion and their opposite. He sees them rise and he watches them fall. So that practice I was telling you about, if you get to the end of a day And we're talking, I am speaking to the Western people, I am speaking to householders, I am not monks and Eastern monasteries and so forth. Basically, if you get to the end of a work day, you've been at work and you've been with people of the world, and you're a practitioner, and usually you can keep yourself pretty calm and even-minded. You can keep a decent level of even-minded yoga, maybe not such an extent that you can practice Shanae all the time and be like the Avadhut or Sri Ramakrishna, but you've attained at least that much. Then at night you watch what sticks in the mind, and you don't take it into dream. You don't take it into deep sleep, because it'll come back at you the next day in the waking state more pronounced, or it will hide and come back at the wrong time. This is the accumulation of karmas and adding more gloom on gloom, or more of a kind of physical fuel to a physical fire, rather than burning away with the wisdom fire all these problems. So I'm stating this as a kind of practice that people can do at the end of the day. Make sure you don't go to sleep with negativities in your mind, if you just want to put it very simply. You sit down 10, 15 minutes if you want, or however long your meditation is, and how much this problem affected you. You just meditate it away. You just dissolve it in the fire of burning intelligence and make sure that it's gone. So this is what the Avadhut does, like Buddhist-cha yata jale, like bubbles in water. He sees everything in his mind during that day's experience with the body-mind mechanism and the senses in between. He sees what's left over that didn't fall when it rose, and he plunges those with exertion and dissolves them like bubbles into water. So this practitioner is doing this all the time. The person who does practice of neti neti is really doing this all the time. It's one of the most direct and powerful of practices in Vedanta. Like this is one of the most powerful in Buddhism. So I'm talking about a person who's, and I can attest to it, weeding a garden, you know how not fun that is, even physically. So if you're being pestered by these things, say you weren't doing this dissolution process every meditation at night, and you were keeping things in your mind that were storing up and causing you problems later, karmas, samskaras, and reactions and so forth, miseries and sufferings. And then you would put yourself on in this regimen of neti neti. And I've showed this a few times, but I'm going to show it in a different order this time. We're going to go up the actual neti neti side and not look at iti iti yet. Basically, look up the middle first. Here's the good old panchakarana, contemplication processes at the base of this helix of Maya, a double helix that goes like this. See, that's what flummoxes people. They get in Maya, and they go on a path of virtue, and they find that it doesn't get them out of vice. They go on a path of goodness, and they find that it didn't get them out of negativity, positivity and negativity. And so then that leaves them at the end of their day, the end of their life, or at the end of a series of lifetimes, not in possession of the solution that they want, which is this non-dual fire of living intelligence that the Avadhut has in his possession, that burns away everything, not just virtue and vice, but these higher considerations. So down here, then, this double helix of Maya is really rotating on this pedestal inside of the 5 elements, and then the 10 senses. Because besides touching, tasting, hearing, smelling, and seeing, you've got their origins, called the tanmatras, the subtle senses back inside of you. The senses came out of those. The senses just can't appear in a body and say, oh, I belong to the body. It's just like they belong to the subtle senses, like everything in the waking state belongs and comes from your dream state. You just projected it there. Then you go back to dream about it later when you take it away. So everyone's looking at everything ass backwards, from the outside in rather than the inside out. So the seeking origins, utpatti, is very important for this process of self-knowledge and destruction of ignorance. So from Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 elements, to the 10 senses, to the 5 vital forces, to the mental complex of thought, mind, intelligence, and ego, right? Pancha Antakarna is a 4-fold mind, all the way up to pure existence itself. Then we see that this is double helix of Maya is spinning with these. And they are constantly being served to billions of souls who are caught in this double helix of Maya. So once this is realized and seen, then the practitioner who has heard this truth from the Guru or from the Acharya, from the illumined soul, like we've been hearing it from the Avadhut, finds himself or herself a teacher, gets a method, finds a guru, and then practices. So that's where you have guru, method, mantra, and practice. Mantra there, for some of you now knows, it's the Khetri mantra. It's the Melana mantra. It's the mantra that you got from an authority, not a mantra that you got from a book or from some person who hasn't even practiced it yet. So this is a precious part of this 4-fold practice that they do. Guru, method, mantra, and practice. You can memorize those 4 words. When that soul gets serious about that and wants off this double helix of Maya that's spinning through lifetimes, through millennia, like a Kala Chakra, Buddha said, a wheel of time, then they take these very tattvas, they're called, and says, I am not the 5 elements. Then the next, when they understand this, like say, Patanjali says, meditate on fire, meditate on ether, meditate on water, meditate on earth, right? Well, didn't we just meditate on fire in these last 2 classes? So you've done your meditation on fire, now take it deep and get to the source of all fire that can now be a weapon for you to burn away any persistence of ignorance in you, and burn it every night, every day in your morning meditation. Your salute to the sun should be that. It shouldn't just be a body saying, oh, aren't we having fun here, bowing to a shining orb in the sky and thinking ourselves to be spiritual. You've got to know the meaning of fire. You can't just be baptized with a little water. You've got to be purified with the inner fire, my teacher used to say. That is a real makes you a candidate for a true spiritual life. In the interim, you're still a practitioner, and hopefully you'll reach a Dharma, a holder of the Dharma. You'll become a holder of the Dharma. But a spiritual life is something very different from both of those. So this is why they meditate on this. You can't just say, I am not the 5 elements, and walk away into the 5 elements. Is that working for anyone? I mean, basically, they walk into the 5 elements and they don't even see the 5 elements. There's air in everything. There's ether in everything, water in everything. There's fire potential in everything, and they're not seeing it. They're seeing the objects, not the elements. So the elements have pulled the wool over their eyes. This double helix of Maya has pulled the wool over everyone's eyes, making them think that objects are real. But what about the 5 elements that make up objects? So you haven't even taken your first step in Yoga 101 yet. If Patanjali says, if you haven't meditated on the alambanas, that's the 5 elements. You have to do a meditation on them to find their origin and their significance, and then use them in practice. Well, I'll just leave it at that, because it's the same for all these steps, what I just said. But let's just go on. I am not the senses of cognition nor of action. That's these 10 senses, the indriyas. Most people are living a sense life, not a spiritual life. So the senses, attach to the objects and give them pleasure. So it's just a repeat of what I was just saying here. And I'm not going to repeat it again for you. Just look out there and see it happening. And change the scene. I am not the ever-changing vital forces of nature. So at these first 3 steps, we're still dealing with nature, aren't we? But Patanjali, the father of yoga, wants you to get Kaivalya pratistam, Vachiti Shakti iti. He wants you to get something that's beyond vital force and is more the likes of Shakti, the mother of intelligence. And guess what she has? The fire of living intelligence, see. So you're being led towards that when you follow neti neti in the proper and right way. Householders can follow this. I did. And so basically, it's a practice that's a part of the Atma Vichara tradition in India. And doesn't mean that you have to go away to a cave and renounce everything and not touch, see, taste, smell, or hear anything again. This is a yogi who walks out of the cave after renouncing, after meditating on fire, walks out and sees the sun god. He walks out, he meditated on the alambana of water, marches out of his cave in the morning and dips himself in the water god. And walks out of the cave after meditating on air and breathes it in and opens up the central channel for the prana to come up so that Kundalini Shakti can invest him with it. That's the idea here. About this time, this practitioner realizes without a doubt that he's viewing Saguna Brahman, that everything is changing around him. And he's not yet ready to say it's nirguna. He's not yet ready to understand the nature of formlessness beyond dualities like the Avadhut has been talking to him about. Sorry, I see it up there, but I haven't climbed the mountain yet. I'm halfway up. So help me. Pahimam, help me up. So that happens about this juncture. But then when it comes to the mind, I'm not the ego, the mind, its thoughts, or the intellect. This is where the challenge comes. And this is where the good get going. See, as a saying they have, they know, they need to know that they've reached a very high position and that the mind is now, they're not the mind. So I am not. Mano na Buddha na hamkara chittani naham. Right? Verse on Nirvana Shatkam of Shankara. Mano Buddha hamkara chittani naham. Nacha shrotra jive. Nacha grana netri. Well, grana and shotra were down here, but now he's up here at the mano buddha hamkara part and chittani naham. I'm not my mind's thoughts. Doesn't it sound like Avadhut to you? I have a mind, but I'm also beyond the mind. I have thoughts, but I control them. They do not control me. So this is old ground to the Avadhut. This is past lifetime work he did. So when he gets this far, he arrives at a kind of shunyata. Neti neti and shunyata, if you want to call shunyata kind of Buddhist conclusion, and neti neti kind of a Vedantic conclusion, then these siddhantas come together very nice. They call that a bhava yoga. No moods anymore in that yogi. It's not subject to moods. He likes everything as clear and crystal as he just saw it inside of himself, that all of this was not his self. This is called the not self by Shankara. Anatman. You can't play with that word and pose it against the Atman. See, the Atman is, the non-Atman is not, it never was. Na asat vijite bhavana bhava vijite sataha. Ubiyor api drisntos to anayos tattvadarshi bihi. You see the difference between the self and the not self, between the truth and the non-truth. I know them both now. So this is why you do the practice. All right, hold this in mind now. And you say that you can see how the references are going straight across through the helix of Maya to the AT-AT realization. It's not necessarily that I want to imply that you get here and then jump here. Like all of a sudden you see AT-AT, all this is Brahman, because you probably begin to see that up here when you get beyond the mind. But at the same time, there is a path of AT-AT that is happening either simultaneously or after the fullness of Neti-Neti has taken place. So it starts with, whereas Neti-Neti said, I am not the five elements, the realization of that he takes with him is called, the five elements are where? Within me. As what? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but as thoughts. The thoughts, air, ether, fire, water, and earth. Om Dayu Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prathivi Shantihi Apaho Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vinashpataya. Everything from water to herbs is there inside me as my thought. And I have a word for it, and if I say it, it will be. And if I don't say it, it will not be. And that's how the mind projects everything and withdraws it, projects it and dissolves it. If you must say it, creates it and destroys it. But of course, that doesn't happen. So next thing is the senses are nothing but Brahman at all times. Beautiful quotes in the Mundaka Upanishad about that you see nothing but Brahman through these senses. But the senses, of course, have to be purified. We just said that a little while ago. Senses, the impure senses do not see Brahman, cannot say, oh, there's a cigar, I can smoke it. Isn't that Brahman nice? You see, I had actually seen people do that. They say, oh, well then, if everything's Brahman, I could eat ice cream and smoke cigars, right? One person told me. See, so that's an impure senses there. They're making a wrong conclusion. And they shouldn't be saying anything about Brahman. They're just saying, my senses really like this cigar and this ice cream. And just leave it at that. Enjoy it all you want. At some point in your life, then, when the cigar gives you cancer, the ice cream fails to satisfy you anymore, then maybe you'll turn towards Neti-Neti. And that's way back at 101 again. So these senses are nothing but Brahman at all times, whereas before, I am not the senses of cognition or of action. There are five of each, right? Like coming, going, procreating, evacuating, those are gross senses. Touching, tasting, seeing, those are subtle senses. So these senses, when they're pure, see nothing but Brahman at all times. And it's like Swamiji saying, someone asked him, have you ever seen God? And he's like, I've seen nothing but God ever since I opened my eyes here on this earth. And neither have you. You've seen nothing but God. But my senses are pure, he might as well have gone on to say. Yours are not pure yet. So I can declare it with certitude that I'm seeing nothing but Brahman here, because I know what the non-Brahman is. But you're mixing the two together. And you say you can't have both. You can't have God and Mammon at the same time. That admixture will not work, will it? Because that's oil and water. And do they mix? We tell the children, because this is a 101 teaching in spiritual practice. So you watch that for about 45 seconds, or if you're really slow, 45 lifetimes, and pretty soon you'll understand Neti-Neti and why you must separate. You must realize the difference between Purusha and Prakriti, the difference between Brahmatman and the Jiva. And so when this comes clear to you, then you will take up a practice and free yourself from, and the Avadhut has gone beyond both of this. The idea that it ever mixed in the first place is not in him. About that time, then the unchanging makes itself known to the advanced practitioner. I'd say this becomes a matter of advanced practitioner. The Avadhut is, of course, beyond those as well. So Nirguna Brahman, or the unchanging Brahman, occurs strongly to that soul. And then here at the level of the mental complex, he says Brahman is perceived through every modification of the mind. So as before, as I'm not the ego mind, its thoughts or intellect. Why was that? Because the impurities, there's still that admixture of the world with Brahman in them, in that mind. So now that's all clear, and he's not seeing through a glass darkly anymore. And he can say with all assurance that I am seeing Brahman through every modification of the mind, because that mind is pure. It's like trying to see, through a dark glass, all of a sudden you take the dark glass away and you put the pure crystal there, the pure mirror there, or glass. Now I can see everything, because all the imperfections were taken away. So I can see this is all a modification of Brahman. Take that away, put the dark glass back. Hey, this all looks really murky here. But I'm going to call it Brahman anyway. It's not going to work. You cannot make that assertion with any finality. So up you go towards this great pinnacle called Mahayoga, which is like equivalent in the iti side of things to the Abhava Yoga and the neti side of things. And you say all this, instead of not this, not this. And as I say, this may be even the double helix of Mahamaya. You can weave yourself through all of these as the adept practitioner who's covering every base is making connections as he or she goes. And later out, we'll come and sing it to you. We'll sing a song to you, you see, and say, this is how I did it. I'm the Avadhut. All I can say at the end here is that I'm pure existence, pure knowledge, pure bliss. As boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Jananim Sharanam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padmoy Toye Shritwa Pranamami Mahur Mahur Pranamami Mahur